Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for checking out the show. Chris and Jason here. Real quick before we get started, we are in the planning process for our November event. Is it 7th and 8th? 6th and 7th?
Yep, 7th and 8th.
Tampa, Florida. We are sort of on a wait list. We're not 100% sure who's going to be in the room yet. We have some maybes out there. So get your applications in at hardmoneymastermindinnercircle.com. And we hope to see you in Tampa in November. All right. Creative default exits. There's always some funny stuff that happens in default loan situations. They get a little unpredictable. We got a few that we're going to talk about that we've exited recently or that we're working on exiting right now. And just the unexpected things that can happen when you do a loan on a piece of investment property.
Well, the good news, let's talk about defaults first in general. If you underwrite a loan correctly and it does default, and loans default, right? The best deals that you've ever done sometimes will still end up defaulting. Best borrowers, great collateral, good situation, they'll still default. So we've always encouraged lenders to not take on deals that, are going to be headaches, or that are kind of going to be hit, or you're like, oh, there's going to be a loan to own deal. I already know there's going to default, because like even good deals default. So that being said, a deal that defaults, as long as it's underwrote correctly, you really should have nothing to worry about, right? I'm not saying it's not going to be a headache or take time and things like that, but if you underwrite a loan and the borrower brings a lot of money to the table and you have a lot of equity, and for the most part, they're decent borrowers. Not every default that we do or not every deal we do is, A+ borrowers, or at least, maybe we thought they were good, but we found out later on they weren't. But that being said, if there's enough room in the deal, chances are it's going to work out fine, and you're still going to get out of the deal safe with all your principal, all your interest, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's when collateral comes back to being number one, is when this borrower and the character and the credit and capacity is not performing, right? And then it comes back to, hey, we're in a great position collateral wise, let's figure it out. So a couple that have happened recently. So there's one that we just exited last week where, a couple brothers own a real estate company, and they own a good amount of property. Some they purchased, some they've inherited. And the main guarantor, who's kind of running the deal that I would communicate with, funny enough, is a judge in New Jersey, in I think it's Bergen County, New Jersey. And we did a loan for this group, mainly against a mixed-use property. There's a few retail spots, and then a few apartment buildings. It's probably worth, 1.2 to 1.5. And we were doing a $650K bridge loan, so they could use that money to go buy other real estate, and they were going to pay us off by refinancing. And we also had cross collateral. We had, I don't remember all the details of the cross collateral, but 3 or 4 other properties as collateral. So we're in a very good spot. In the subject property alone, we're maybe, 50 loan to value. So these guys default pretty quickly, maybe 6 months in. Maybe they made about that many payments, and then they stopped making payments. It rolled to the default rate, and I was communicating with the main borrower, and they were just tight on cash. And now this thing, a $650K loan at the default rate of 24%, is accruing at 13%. So he tries to refinance, and I'm seeing the emails. I'm copied on the stuff. I see term sheets. Long story short, that first go to refi does not get approved for whatever reason. And that is even before we started foreclosure and stuff. That doesn't go through. It's too many months behind now. We start foreclosure, which is not a quick process in New Jersey. And it's a judicial process. And because this guy's a lawyer and a judge, he contested it, to buy some time. So now we have a contested foreclosure in North Jersey going on, which is not the best spot to be in. This is not going to be quick. But the borrower's in good communication. He's not hiding. A lot of people in these situations, they dodge you because they don't have any news for you, so they just don't. This guy wasn't like that. He was in touch with me the entire time. He gets into another refinance process this spring, and he's like, look, they know the situation. It's very unlikely to get a refinance approved when you're in foreclosure. It can happen, but it's very unusual, especially with a bank. So I see the term sheet. They're in the due diligence process. I ask them a couple times to make sure that, your loan officer at this bank knows this property's in foreclosure. We have filed a judgment. He knows all that. Okay, fine. And so they do their bank process. It takes probably 3 months. And I actually see that there's title work going on. And the bank and the title company are communicating. I'm like, wow, this thing might actually go through. And of course, we have legal fees on there, a bunch of default interest. Our $650K loan had a total payoff of $880. And that was too high to make the deal work. He was going to have to bring 50 grand in cash to the table, which he doesn't really have. So, okay, we have plenty of room at this 24% default rate. We can trim it down. Trim it down to 17. Then the bank tacked on like another fee. They had to pay a broker. So I'm like, all right, 17. He's got to bring cash to close. That's not going to work. I end up issuing a payoff statement at 16.5%, paying all legal fees, all late fees, and in essence, a default rate somewhere in between the normal note rate and the top default rate of 24, a perfectly fine exit. I don't remember how many months it was, but it was many months that were accrued on that. I worked it out with them. Everyone stayed in touch. It's in that area. There's always a bunch of lawyers involved. Like the bank has one, the borrower has one, like everybody has lawyers. Stayed in touch with everyone and babysat it all the closing table. We got a wire last week. Really good exit. Funky situation.
Yeah, and so I was looking in the file as Chris was talking, and we had 4 properties, all free and clear, first position loans, 50 LTV based on as is value. The tenants, the money that was coming in from the tenants monthly was clearly enough to service the debt, which the tenants probably stopped paying, moved out since then. Which
that's another part.
Which
we did execute on an assignment of rents.
Yep.
That's another wrinkle to that one, is that you probably have an assignment of rents in your loan document package. And the way that works is if the property is tenant occupied, that's something that gets recorded along with the mortgage. And our attorney sent letters to the tenants, the maybe 5 or 6 units of retail and apartment tenants in this building, and said, hey, FYI, this loan's in default. You can now direct your rent payments to us. And most of them did. And we would just add it to the trust balance, like the total owed, in essence. And the judge, he was aware of this. And so now all of a sudden he's really got motivation to get out of this thing. He's not even getting income from his income property, right? So what's the point? Not that he wasn't motivated to exit, but he made it happen. He made it happen on that one.
Yeah, a few other. That's a good point, because that doesn't always happen like that. So a few other things to note. The borrowers had a 690 credit score and a 751 credit score, respectively, between the 2 borrowers. They had several $100,000 in a bank account at that time. So you never know what's going to happen in situations. Obviously, it's a little bit of a funky deal because it's a cash out refinance on a commercial building. It wasn't necessarily like a fix and flip loan that had a defined exit strategy, but things change. And it ended up that he was very, very thankful after the fact, after we got paid off. He was very, very thankful that he was like, hey, I'd like to write you guys a positive review. I'd like to see if there's opportunities to do new deals with you in the future. And let's talk about kind of our opinion on that. And if this, case study takes this whole episode of the podcast, I think that's a good one. I think it's a good learning tool of what to do in a certain situation. But we told him, obviously well, let me back up one thing. I've been thinking why he would give us a positive review, why he liked doing business with us. And I think this is the reason why. He was a judge. He had a C personality. He took the law. He took like the legal code and the law. He respects the law, right? He's a judge. He's an attorney, right? Like he knew that the law was the law, and he respected us as business people and our loan docs. And he knew that he was in default, and he knew that he was in the wrong. We were in the right. Like he signed legal documents stating that he was going to make payments. He signed legal documents that showed, who was responsible for what, and he was in the wrong. He didn't make the payments. So he didn't take that personally. He wasn't emotional about the deal, right? He was like, you know what? And then because, Chris gave him a discount on the default rate to help him get out of the deal, I think that made him happy. And we still were able to, it was still a win-win. We were able to make, our investors were happy. We were happy. He ended up being happy. And I think he respected us as a company. I was like, hey, you guys could have, made me pay more. You could have held up this sale. You could have foreclosed on this property. You could have done a lot of things, but I respect that you guys were your integrity on the deal. And he admitted that he was at fault, right? That usually is not what happens. Usually when people are in default, it's like, be like, I'm right, you're wrong. Like he was happy, he was okay with this, I don't know, kind of hard to explain, but like I was trying to think what was going through his head. And I'm like, hey, this business wrote me a loan. I signed legal docs stating what I was responsible for. They gave me money and showed what they were responsible for. And I missed payments and I was in default and I got foreclosed on. And he took it and he held himself accountable for it, which was great. So this is still happening in real time. We were paid off in full, right? So we're good. But in real time, he's been trying to reach out to do another loan with us because he owns a lot of other properties. He's trying to, build a 5-unit building thing, some properties and things like that. And we left it as like, we're open to do another deal. I don't know how aggressive we're going to be on the deal, but like, let's figure out if there's a way.
It would be very conservative.
Yeah, we're going to be conservative. Let's figure out a way that you could really exit. But like, just because loans go into default doesn't mean that we necessarily just write them off forever and not ever do it. That's usually the case. A lot of the times, if a borrower is in bad default and they ghost us or they disappear, or they're complete, doesn't work out, we might not do anything. But like, for the most part, like Chris said earlier, he communicated, and communication is key in this business. If you have a loan that's in default, like you have to communicate with them as much as possible and make sure they're communicating with you, because as soon as they stop communicating with you, you're in trouble. And we always tell our borrowers, it's like, hey, if anything goes wrong, good, bad, just let us know. Let's figure out a way to work with you. And that's really important. One other side note on this is that's one of the reasons we also like to collect monthly payments and not roll in monthly payments, because that gives us a good indicator on if the borrowers are in good standing or not, because we know every month we're going to know within 30 days what's going on, if they make their payment or not making a payment, so we can be proactive. I think a lot of lenders on a deal like this might have rolled in 6 months or 12 months worth of payments, and for all we know, hey, everything's performing, everything's great, because there's no communication. There doesn't need to be any communication. So that's kind of a little tip as well to try to get payments and figure out kind of communication ways to get in front of some of these folks to make sure everything's in good standing.
I'm going to tell one more before we hop. I'll make this one quick. Yeah, let's do one more. Okay. So I'm looking at my other screen now because I have the loan summary up there. So we did a borrower, again in New Jersey, in this situation, bought a property at auction for $545,000, and it needed some work, regular residential fix and flip deal. He was a new client for us, seemed to have cash, seemed to own properties, and knows what he's doing. So we did a loan of $400K with a $50,000 holdback, and there aren't that many lenders who knew how to do sheriff sale properties, but we can, and our lawyers are comfortable with it. We have a title company that knows the process. So, okay, we do 400.
Well, it worked in this case because the title insurer, the title company was willing to take the risk and issue us full title insurance cover, even though the deed wasn't going to get put onto record until a few days afterwards.
Yeah, and something similar, something related to that did happen. Okay, so we do a $400K loan advisor for $545. He's bringing $230,000 to the table, right? He's bringing a lot of cash. We're in a good position on this property. It's a very straightforward resi deal. Somehow he ends up slapping a mortgage on ahead of us, which is not legal. It's covered by insurance. I don't know why he did this, because it was even before the date, like his deed, meaning the date that he officially owned the property, and our mortgage recorded at the same day, called like end of June. At the beginning of June, even before he owned it, technically, he slapped a mortgage on it. So like somehow we're in second position. This guy defaults almost immediately. We had a $50,000 holdback. We did one draw for $25,000. He made one payment and never paid again. Just disappeared. And then obviously we start foreclosure. We find out about the other lien on it, and now there's litigation going on. The title company's involved, and the title company appoints an attorney that we don't have to pay, which is good. Our attorney stayed in touch, but a court case happens, there's litigation, and we, in essence, sued to get into first position, and we won. Great. All right, so now we're back in first position, but he's still in default. The property's listed for like $1 million or something like that. It looks like it's going to sell, meaning like it says under contract on MLS. And then months go by, it hasn't sold. Our attorney's talking to their attorney. Is he really selling? Like the borrower himself hasn't made a peep. Like he's represented by counsel, so he's not talking to anybody. Really weird situation. Why aren't you selling this thing? So fast forward some months, we're owed a lot of interest at this point, and we were in contact with a company out of Miami that buys notes. And in my experience in this business, I've never seen those deals come to fruition. And so when they reach out, and they do frequently, brokers or somebody, you can't tell if it's real, can't tell whatever, reach out because you have loans in default that are in public record, and they're like, hey, I can buy your non-performing loans. And they usually offer numbers that don't work for us anyway. But this one, we negotiated a decent deal, and it seemed kind of real. And I was talking to our business partner, Ryan, and I'm skeptical, after being in this game so long, I'm skeptical of stuff like this, but the communication with this group, and it just seemed like there was something there. So we work out a deal. In essence, we're going to sell this. We have not recorded a judgment yet. We're going to sell this at the note rate. So our note rate being 12.99 and our default rate being 24. There's some room in there if you can buy this and then engineer an exit. So we have our attorney do the docs. Harris Danoff, a lot of people know him from the inner circle and stuff. He does the docs. He did a really good job managing the transaction. And I see that the buyer of the note is a self-directed IRA. And I'm like, oh, that made me think this is real. Like if you're doing docs to do a direction of investment and buy a note and an IRA, okay, this looks real. And it closed. This was 2 months ago, I think. We got our wire from the buyer. We did all these like loan sale documents, overnighted them, the originals, like all kinds of stuff, like emailed servicing reports to their new servicer. Like first time I can remember that we exited a deal by selling the note to someone who wasn't already involved in the transaction. Like there have been situations where maybe a second mortgage holder is going to get wiped out on foreclosure, has bought a note, some other interested third party, like a business partner, somebody, affiliated with the borrower. We've sold notes to parties like that, but never a complete third party. The first one. And it was interesting. It was a weird default. I don't know why this guy disappeared. I don't know why people do business like that. But point being, guys, like stuff happens in the real estate investing world. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know if somebody's tanking financially. We're in a good position on the property. We can, engineer an exit strategy when we need to, in one way or another, getting creative. But like,
yeah,
what you think is a regular resi fix and flip, and some wild stuff happened.
Yeah, but also just keep in mind, being in a good spot day one, have a lot of equity day one based off as is value, and when the property is completed based off after repair value is key. We're not doing unsecured loans. We're doing collateral based first position loans where we have, the first mortgage lender should always have the least amount of risk. And in order to do that, it's a a requirement for the borrower to have good characteristics. It's a requirement for them to have the capacity to do the deal, right? It's a requirement for them to, be able to execute. But more importantly, the underlying asset is still the most important part of this business. So doing 100% financing, and, I hate to say it, it's foolish, right? Giving high leverage is just foolish, because when a good borrower doesn't perform, and I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, but when it does, you don't want to go out of business because you wrote one bad deal and you're going to lose tons and tons and tons of money potentially of it. So just be safe on it. Have the borrower bring real skin in the deal. Anyone's going to walk away from sweat equity, but it's hard to walk away from real hard-earned cash that they're putting into these deals. And, we always talk about, hey, we're lending up to 80% of the purchase price and 100% of the construction. So effectively that's 20% down based off the purchase price. But like our portfolio average is a heck of a lot more down payment money than that. And, figure out ways that you can structure these deals with your borrowers and have them bring as much money as you can into these deals. Right. And, get creative, figure out ways that they can do that. Some obviously you can get more money out of somebody than another, but that's an important thing to focus on.
That's the pod for today, guys. We'll see you here next time. And in the meantime, we'll see you inside hardmoneymastermind.com.
Absolutely. See you guys later.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note,
that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.